Hey guys, tonight we're going deep into the frostbitten heart of medieval Iceland, where you've just trudged through a sleet-streaked valley. Your woolen mittens stiff with ice and your boots squelching against slushy turf. Wind howls across the frozen fjord, and the only visible landmark is the low, grass-covered hump of your family's turf house, half buried in snow like a sleepy seal. You stomp the icy crust off your boots, duck into the dark doorway, and just like that, you're snowed in. Probably until April. You probably won't survive this, by the way, unless you happen to be fluent in sheep insulation, fermented dairy, and storytelling marathons that last for weeks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're joining us from somewhere cold or even comfortably warm, drop your location and local time in the comments. Always fun to see where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck beneath a low birch beam, wool hood damp, and shuffle into the central room where the hearth flickers just enough to cast dancing shadows against the stone wall. It smells like smoke, wet wool, and the faintest trace of salted lamb. The fire pit isn't just a fireplace, it's the center of your entire life from now until the snow melts. This is your winter universe, and it's about the size of your living room. Outside? There's no outside, not really. You're locked in by snowdrifts taller than your sheep. Icelandic winters in the 11th century aren't for the faint of heart, or the weak of wool. The average winter temperature hovers somewhere between you'll live and frozen eyeball. And sunlight? Maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. If the gods are feeling generous. Your turf house, like most, is partly sunken into the earth, insulated with layers of stone, moss, and centuries of smoky grime. The air inside is stale but blessedly warm compared to the gale outside. Thick sheepskins hang over doorways to keep out drafts. You've got just enough light from a whale oil lamp to see your hands, and that's only because someone remembered to clean the soot off the dome of bone glass that covers the flame. The floors are hard-packed earth covered with woven reed mats, and the walls are crammed with everything you'll need to survive. Wooden tools, fish-drying racks, bunches of herbs, bundles of wool, dried cod strung up like laundry. You've also got about 6 cousins, 2 grandparents, 1 cranky goat, and probably a lice problem. But let's not dwell. Historians still argue whether these houses had designated bedrooms or just one communal sleeping platform piled with hay and sheepskins. Most likely, you slept side by side with family, friends, and maybe a chicken or two, because what else was going to keep your toes warm? Here's your winter rhythm. Wake when the light comes, if it comes. Feed the animals, boil some dried lamb, patch a boot, tell a story, listen to a story, make up a story about a haunted outhouse, and then drift off again to the sound of your grandmother snoring next to a pile of turnips. Rinse, repeat, for 5 months. And even though life is hard, hope you don't run out of dried fish. Hard? There's a kind of cozy rhythm to it. You know every creak of the timber frame, every smell in the smoke, every snort from the sleeping goat. Outside, it's nothing but a white void. Inside, it's a world of flickering shadows and muffled laughter. Let's pause to appreciate a little-known fact. Icelanders actually imported timber from Norway because their own island was so treeless. Which means if you're sitting on a carved chair by the fire right now, it may have crossed the sea on a Viking ship. And you, lucky thing, are using it to dry your socks. One quirky habit? People used to urinate in special pots near the hearth, because hiking to the outhouse in January meant you'd come back with fewer toes. These pots were then tossed outside in a designated pea trench that would freeze over until spring. Iceland, where even your waste hibernates. But you don't complain. Not because you're stoic, but because it literally costs you calories to open your mouth. So you save your energy for the things that really matter. Food, fire, family, and finding out whether the neighbor's sheep got eaten by that one-eyed troll again. The snow still falls, thick and silent, blanketing the roof of your turf house until even the chimney smoke has to elbow its way out. Inside, your eyes have adjusted to the flickering half-light, and your nose is starting to ignore the mingling aromas of singed wool, boiled root vegetables, and seal fat. Evening has arrived, not that you could tell by the sky, but by the way everyone begins circling the hearth like lazy moths. This is storytelling hour, not officially, of course. There's no bell. But once the stew's been ladled into wooden bowls and everyone has a bit of hard cheese to gnaw on, the sagas begin. Not just the famous ones like Egil and Njal. No, tonight you're getting a mix. The great epics, some juicy village gossip, and a ghost story that'll make you think twice about going to the latrine alone. One person speaks at a time, usually the eldest, but anyone can jump in, especially if they remember a better version, or one with slightly more blood and slightly fewer morals. You sit cross-legged, pulling your wool blanket tighter while your uncle, whose voice sounds like a raven with a sore throat, starts his tale with the classic Icelandic lead-in. There was a man named Thorstein. And just like that, you're off. Now here's the thing about these stories. They aren't just entertainment. They're survival manuals. You learn from them how to navigate feuds, who your ancestors were, how to deal with ghosts who want to borrow your soup ladle. These sagas are layered with legal arguments, etiquette lessons, and more than a few insults that still sting after 800 years. Historians still argue whether these oral traditions were strictly memorized or flexibly performed. What's clear is that they were as vital as food. You didn't just hear a saga, you wore it like a second layer of wool. It shaped how you thought, how you argued, and how you named your baby goats. One fringe detail that's too good to skip. Some sagas mention people getting so engrossed in a story that they forgot to add fuel to the fire and the room froze over. A good tale could quite literally chill you to the bone. And it's not just human voices that light up these long nights. The room glows faintly with the warm, sputtering light of whale oil lamps, meticulously carved from bone or driftwood. You know, the kind of lamp that makes everything look just a little haunted. These lamps don't burn candles, mind you. Instead, they use a wick made from twisted moss or sheep gut, dipped in rendered seal fat. It's less rose-scented ambiance and more beached mammal essence, man, but it does the job. Sometimes the lamps hiss. Sometimes they pop. Once, yours exploded a little when your cousin knocked it over trying to reenact a sword fight with a soup ladle. You still haven't let him forget that. Your grandmother, meanwhile, is holding a distaff in one hand, spinning wool as she listens. Her fingers move without looking, twisting fleece into thread that will soon become socks, tunics, or, if the winter gets longer than expected, more emergency insulation for the outhouse door. It's worth pausing here to appreciate Icelandic wool. Tough, greasy, and practically waterproof, it's the duct tape of the Viking world. The outer hairs are so coarse they might as well be wire, but the inner layer is softer, warmer, and more coveted than gossip about the bishop's suspiciously young housemaid. Speaking of gossip, that's the other major activity. Winter turns everyone into a spy. Who's sneaking off to whose sleeping mat? Who put the dried cod in the wrong rack? Who claimed they saw a glowing fox spirit on the mountain last week, but actually just got into the beer too early? You laugh, but the stories stick. You still remember the one about the sheep who predicted avalanches. Allegedly, it was probably just cold and screaming. But still. One last odd detail to drift off on. Some families kept small carved memory sticks or rune tally rods to track their saga versions or even family histories. They'd scratch or burn symbols into the wood as a kind of backup drive for their brains. If the house caught fire, they'd grab the sheep, the baby, and the story stick. In that order. And now, as your uncle's tale winds to its climactic duel in a frozen glacial ravine, you feel your eyelids droop. Not because it's boring, but because the warmth, the wool, and the low murmur of voices blend into something timeless. This isn't just a story. It's a shield against the dark. A wool-wrapped weapon against the winter's slow, creeping silence. The lamp gutters low, casting the room in a buttery haze. You can barely make out the shape of the cat curled by the hearth, its tail twitching in sleep, and the woolen silhouettes hunched around their quiet tasks. With the stories done for now, everyone turns to the other great Icelandic winter pastime. Making things with whatever scraps the year left behind. Your mother reaches for a bundle of coarse wool and you follow suit, your fingers already remembering the rhythm of spinning and knotting. Tonight, you're working by candlegut, a charming term for the twisted string of animal fat and sinew you light in shallow bowls. The flame is steady if you don't breathe too hard, or laugh, or sneeze. You start knitting, not for fun. Knitting is never for fun here. It's for socks, mittens, and blankets, all of which disappear into the maw of the season like breadcrumbs into a snowdrift. One thing about Icelandic winters, they eat textiles. A perfectly good wool mitten you wore yesterday might come back today as a soggy, frost-rimmed rag. The land has no chill, except the literal kind. Historians still argue whether knitting reached Iceland via trade routes with Britain or through Norse expansion. What's more certain is that spinning and weaving were such essential skills that they were listed in marriage contracts. Can't card wool? Good luck finding a husband. Or at least one who won't freeze. You glance at your older cousin across the fire. She's working a drop spindle so fast it looks like she's casting spells. Her pile of yarn grows like snowdrift against the bench, all from fleece she sheared, washed, and combed herself. You're still figuring out how not to poke yourself in the thigh. A quirky tidbit. Some people swore by blessing their yarn with small runes or whispered charms to prevent tangling. Did it work? Who knows? But you're not taking chances. You whisper a quick blessing to your tangled mess, just in case. Over by the door, your grandfather sharpens a knife on a whetstone made from volcanic grit. The sound is soft, but rhythmic. Shh, shh, shh. Not for defense, mind you. The knife is for leather, for food, maybe for whittling down one of those awkwardly long reindeer bones left from the feast last week. You've got time. You've got bones. You might as well make buttons. That's the winter mindset. Everything gets repurposed. Broken sled, cut it down into tool handles, cracked bowl, patch it with pitch and keep eating. Old fish skeleton? Turns out it makes a great comb, if you're brave. And if you're not making things, you're fixing them. Clothes, tools, fences, you even repair songs. Someone forgot the middle verse of a ballad last night? No problem. You all invent a new one by committee and suddenly it's part of the canon. Oral culture is wonderfully democratic like that. You shift on your bench, trying to stretch your legs without bumping the person beside you. The room isn't large, just enough space for sleeping, eating, crafting, and the occasional wrestling match over who gets the last piece of dried lamb. The ceiling is low, the air smoky, and still, it feels like a sanctuary. A small, wool-smelling cocoon wrapped in layers of moss and snow. You pause to rest your eyes, blinking slowly. Outside, the wind gusts again, shaking the sod roof like a giant sigh. But inside, everything is still. You glance up at the smoke hole in the ceiling, where a faint shimmer of snowlight filters down through soot-stained edges. This is your sky for the season. Every so often, you hear the muffled crack of ice breaking on the nearby stream. You imagine the world outside as a painting. The hills blue and white, the sheep huddled like rocks, the coastline frozen solid. But you don't go out unless you have to. In winter, everything you need is here, except maybe fresh air. But who needs that when you've got seal fat and family? A final oddity for tonight. Some families had wool counting songs. Little chants used to keep track of stitches, lengths, or even spinning rotations. Think of them as medieval Icelandic knitting playlists. Catchy, repetitive, and perfect for lulling you into a trance while your hands keep working. Your stitch slips, you blink yourself awake. Someone chuckles gently, a cousin maybe, and hands you a cup of hot whey. It tastes like the ghost of cheese and feels like warmth itself. You sip slowly, the rhythm of needles clicking softly around you. There's no rush, no schedule. Just snow outside, wool in your hands, and the hum of a household surviving one stitch at a time. The fire cracks softly now, just enough to cast lopsided shadows across the packed earth floor. You're still sipping your warm whey, now lukewarm and slightly sour, but honestly everything in Iceland tastes faintly like it's gone a bit off. That's part of the charm for the survival strategy. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Someone clears a space on the central table, brushing off a pile of wool scraps and a carved bone spoon, and sets down a worn board. It's game time. The board has faint, crisscrossed lines etched into it. Well-loved grooves that have soaked in decades of lamp smoke and stew splatter. The pieces are little discs, some white, some black, some obviously repurposed buttons and pebbles. You're playing an Fateful, the Viking board game of kings and ambushes. Think of it like chess if the queen were always being hunted and the pawns were more stabby. You sit across from your opponent, squinting in the low light. The goal? Protect your king and get him to safety. Or if you're the attacker, trap the king and ruin their night. The pieces clack gently as they slide across the board, each move a test of wits, memory, and how passive-aggressive you're feeling today. Historians still argue about the exact rules of Hnefatafl. The game was never standardized, and each region seemed to play by its own logic. Some versions allow diagonal moves. Others say the king can only win by reaching the board's edge. In one saga, a character cheats by moving two pieces at once, which seems both rude and ambitious. What's not debated is how popular the game was. Boards have been found carved into everything. Tabletops, driftwood, even the stone walls of old farmsteads. You could say Icelanders invented the gamer mindset long before electricity. And without internet trolls, unless you count actual trolls. But Hnefatafl isn't the only entertainment. Someone drags out a second game, a bag of tiny carved bones used for dice. They're not uniform cubes, of course. These are knuckle bones or small vertebrae filed into vaguely square shapes and inked with dots. They bounce erratically, sometimes disappearing into the shadows where you're fairly sure the cat has been hoarding them. Games of chance are played more quietly with a hushed intensity that feels strangely reverent. There's a sense that luck isn't entirely random. Maybe the old gods nudge the bones. Maybe that click against the table is a whisper from Odin himself saying, "Better luck next round." One quirky tradition involves betting favors, not goods. Lose a round? You owe someone help weaving their next fishing net or digging out the latrine path after a blizzard. You win? You might get first pick of the dried fish. The stakes are low but meaningful. After all, in Iceland, dried fish is currency. You'd be amazed what you can bribe someone to do with a slab of cod. Children, meanwhile, aren't excluded from the fun. They invent their own games, chasing each other through narrow corridors, playing who can balance a spoon on their nose the longest, or hiding inside hay bundles and making sheep noises until someone panics. One popular pastime? Making tiny sleds out of fish bones and racing them across the icy floor. It's less horrifying than it sounds, unless you slip and land in the weigh bucket. You're drawn back into the game. The king's in trouble. You pause, hand hovering over the board, thinking. The room is quiet, the tension mild. The fire just barely warm now. There's no real prize, but winning means bragging rights, and those can last an entire season. Another round ends. Someone sighs, someone else stretches. A few rise and wander to their corners while others linger, setting up another game. The sound of game pieces on wood mixes with the distant rattle of wind against the shutters. And just when things seem to wind down, a surprising voice from the corner pipes up. Your great aunt, wrapped in so many layers of wool, she resembles a mobile hay bale. She proposes a riddle game, another Icelandic favorite. Everyone loves riddles, especially when they're weirdly suggestive or vaguely threatening. You know, classic, what walks on four legs in the morning, two at noon, and eats you if you answer wrong kind of stuff. Historians note that riddle contests often appeared in Norse sagas, sometimes as tests of wisdom, sometimes as ways to settle disputes. and sometimes as excuses for characters to talk in riddles when they absolutely didn't need to. You listen as the group begins. What is it that has a tongue but cannot talk, and sits in the corner but travels the world? You mumbled a shoe, just loud enough to get a nod of approval. Someone tosses you a scrap of dried fish as a prize. That's considered a win. The night passes like this. Wool, warmth, low voices, laughter. The board game ends. The riddles trail off. The flames sink lower, orange fading to blue. But even now, even in this smallest of hours, there's a quiet, steady sense of community. You're not just playing games, you're anchoring yourself against the long, white dark. The wind moans softly now, threading through the turf seams and under the door like an old friend who never learned how to knock. You wake early, well, early by winter standards, which means the sky is just slightly less black than it was 6 hours ago. A faint blue glow peeks through the smoke hole, enough to say it's not quite night, not quite day. You stretch under your woolen blanket and bump someone's foot. Probably your cousin's. Possibly a sheep's. You bundle yourself in layer upon itchy layer and head toward the bathhouse. Yes, Icelanders had bathhouses. And no, they weren't just for scrubbing off the goat smell, though that's a perk. These steamy little turf-covered huts are the unsung heroes of winter life. Imagine a low-ceilinged room with wooden benches, a pit in the center filled with hot stones, and buckets of water kept just above freezing thanks to a hole hacked into a nearby spring. You splash, you steam, you survive. Bathhouses are social spaces as much as cleansing ones. You don't just bathe here, you eavesdrop, catch up on news and whisper about who's been sneaking extra fish oil or forgetting to feed the church goose. There's even an unofficial bathhouse hierarchy. Elders closest to the stones, kids by the door, and that one cousin who always passes out from the heat somewhere in the middle. Historians still argue whether these bathhouses were daily indulgences or once-a-week luxuries. The saga records are inconsistent. What's clear is that bathing had both hygienic and spiritual dimensions. Some people believed steam could cleanse the soul. Others just liked how it loosened up their back. A quirky practice? Icelanders sometimes added herbs like angelica or wild thyme to the bathwater. Not for spa vibes, but because they thought it kept away bad spirits and skin rashes. 1 foot soak in minty broth and you're either healed or possessed. Either way, it's an experience. You tiptoe across icy ground, breath-puffing clouds, and duck into the steamy interior. The warmth hits you instantly, like walking into someone's mouth, but nicer. You strip down quickly and find your spot on the bench, careful not to sit too close to the rocks. That's the zone of extreme regret. Around you, conversations bloom. Someone retells last night's saga, this time with more dramatic gestures. Someone else complains about the goat chewing through the roof again. There's talk of a neighbor who may or may not have joined a monastery just to get out of farming. Everyone's hair frizzes in the steam. Everyone's cheeks glow like smoked radishes. You listen, half drowsing. The humidity softens the world, blurs the sharp lines of worry. For a moment, the long Icelandic winter feels almost manageable, steamy, even cozy. You wiggle your toes in the wooden trough, watching the water ripple. Then comes the best part, after bath gossip. You step out, towel yourself with something that's more burlap than fabric, and linger near the entryway where the cold air meets your overheated skin, like a slap and a hug all at once. People chatter about everything. Whose sheep looks suspiciously skinny? Which saga hero probably had the worst breath? How long the priest took to climb the snowy hill yesterday? And then someone mentions a wedding. Not a real one, yet. But a maybe wedding. You perk up. Winter courtships are slow-burn soap operas here. Love blooms in long stares across the fire and shy exchanges of carved trinkets. But the bathhouse is where the speculation happens. You hear whispers of a love triangle involving 2 cousins and 1 confused fisherman. You pretend not to listen, but you are definitely listening. Someone even jokes about bathhouse proposals. Just pop the question between steam pours and see if they faint from love or heat stroke first. You chuckle, stepping out into the bitter air, your hair damp and steaming. The bathhouse door closes behind you with a soft thud, and just like that, you're back in the white silence of the world. Later, when you're inside again, tucked back into your crowded, smoky living space, you realize something important. These little rituals, games, gossip, baths, are more than just ways to pass the time. They're acts of resistance against cold, against boredom, against the creeping sense that winter might swallow you whole. You stoke the hearth, toss on more driftwood, and settle in for the rest of the day. Your skin still tingling from the steam, and your heart just a little lighter from the news that love, like bathwater, finds a way to stay warm. Even here. Later that same quiet afternoon, you find yourself sitting on the edge of a wooden stool that rocks just slightly with every shift of your weight. The air still smells faintly of steam and sheep grease, but now it's mingled with something else. The sharp, smoky scent of burned wood and freshly carved bone. In your lap is a short stick of driftwood, soft and pale, and in your hand is a small knife. Not for cooking, not for slicing rope, but for writing. Welcome to one of medieval Iceland's favorite winter pastimes, carving runes. You scratch the blade slowly, carefully into the wood. The symbol you're making is crooked. Your cousin might laugh, but it'll do. You're not composing a legal document. You're writing a message, something silly. Maybe a charm to ward off boredom. Maybe a name. Maybe just I was here in the 11th century equivalent of bathroom graffiti. Because here's the truth. Medieval Icelanders wrote on everything. Bone, wood, horn, soapstone. Some runes were formal. Prayers, charms, memorials. Others were what historians might politely call casual inscriptions. One infamous message carved into a church bench reads something like, "Thorir carved this while drunk." At least he was honest. Historians still argue about how widespread rune literacy was in Iceland during the Middle Ages. Some claim it was limited to the elite. Others suggest everyone who had a spare afternoon and a sharp knife gave it a shot. Based on how many rune carvings have been found in outhouses, kitchen tools, and random barn walls, you suspect the latter. A quirky habit that's hard not to love? People sometimes carved secret rune messages into love gifts, like the underside of a wooden comb or a spoon handle. Romantic, right? Nothing says "I adore you" like you smell like fresh skyr and fish oil in jagged old Norse. You glance up from your work. Across the room, someone else is bent over a scrap of bone, tongue sticking out in concentration, carefully etching what might be a miniature poem. Or possibly just a crude drawing of a goat. It's hard to tell from here. Rune carving isn't fast, that's the point. It slows time, it sharpens your mind. The repetition is almost meditative. Scrape, pause, brush away the shavings. You're creating something permanent, or at least as permanent as anything gets in a country made of lava and ice. You decide to try your hand at a charm, something to protect your mittens from getting mysteriously lost again. You carve a simple sigil, a blend of known runes, and whisper a rhyme under your breath. Just in case. Icelanders believed in hedge magic, the kind that didn't need a sorcerer, just a good rhyme and a steady hand. You take a moment to admire your work. It's crooked. One rune might be upside down, but it's yours. A message to future archaeologists, or just to your future self when you need a reminder that you made it through this winter once before. And it's not just runes. The whole household gets in on the inscribing action. Someone's decorating a bone comb with looping vine patterns. Another is marking their initials into the handle of a wooden bowl, probably so their brother doesn't steal it again. Your uncle is scratching a tally of dried fish on the doorframe, with a small, angry drawing beside it that looks suspiciously like your cousin's face. You step outside briefly, just to stretch, and see more of these small markings everywhere. On the side of the barn, on a fence post, even on a rock near the stream where someone's carved what appears to be a stick figure throwing up. Art, truly, is eternal. Inside again, the room is quiet. People are focused. The only sounds are soft scraping, the occasional grunt of effort, and the wind singing through the turf outside. The hearth glows low. The air hums with quiet intention. You slide your finished rune stick onto a shelf, where it joins a collection of similarly cryptic objects. Bones with blessings, driftwood with jokes, and a spoon that says, "Don't lick me," in very tiny letters. Somewhere in the future, a scholar might find these. They'll puzzle over your joke, argue about its meaning, and write a dissertation titled, "The Hidden Emotions of Icelandic Spoon Carvings." That's the dream, isn't it? And now you stretch, shake out your fingers, and settle back by the fire, soothed by the knowledge that even in the longest winter, there's always time to scratch your thoughts into something solid. In this house, even silence leaves a mark. As the gray afternoon slouches into evening, though you'd hardly know it by looking at the sky, you hear the unmistakable clatter of someone rummaging through the food stores. Not the quiet foraging of someone fetching a root vegetable. No, this is the loud, hopeful chaos of a person looking for something interesting to eat. Something different. Something that hasn't already been boiled, dried, or regretted 3 times this week. And then you smell it. Ah, yes, fermented shark. Dinner in medieval Iceland is not for the faint of stomach or nose. The star tonight is hakarl, the notorious Greenland shark meat that's been buried, rotted, and dried until it smells like ammonia and tastes like a dare. It's been fermenting under stones for months, which coincidentally is also how long it takes to forget the last time you ate it. You settle in near the hearth as someone slices thin pieces from the leathery white slab and passes them around on a wooden board. The rule is simple. Don't sniff it first. Just chew. And chew. And then chew a little more. Historians still argue whether fermented shark was a delicacy or just desperation disguised as tradition. But hey, when you're stuck on a volcanic island in the middle of the North Atlantic, you get creative with dinner. Especially when half the livestock is frozen solid and the other half is asleep in the barn. A quirky side dish? Sour sheep's milk. Skyer, but make it medieval. It's chunky, tangy, and sometimes faintly fizzy. Some families mix it with grains. Others mix it with more sour milk. It's a choose-your-own adventure of lactose. You look down at your meal. A small mound of dried cod, a chunk of rye flatbread so dense it could be used as a building material, a smear of tallow, and a suspiciously jiggly cube of gelatinous something that was probably a fish at some point. You dip your bread into the tallow, take a bite, and remind yourself, this is tradition. This is heritage. This is Valaya fine. Every now and then, someone surprises the house with a rare treat. Pickled ram's testicles, maybe, or boiled sheep's head. It depends on what parts of the animal were still around when the snow came. You might think this would be a meal of silence and stoicism. You'd be wrong. The room buzzes with commentary. That's not as chewy as last time, someone says, delicately chewing a bit of ear cartilage. I think the shark's gone a bit less rotten this year, adds another, which is apparently a compliment. Are we sure that's tallow? Someone murmurs, poking a lump with the tip of their knife. No one answers, but despite the questionable textures and borderline dangerous aromas, there's a strange comfort in it. You're all in this together. Mouthful by ammonia, laced mouthful. And it's not just the food, it's the ritual. The way someone always tells the same story about the time Great Uncle Ericer tried to ferment seal meat and cleared out the whole valley. Or the tale of the cursed butter churn that allegedly mooed at night. Whether true or not, they've become part of the meal. Just like the food. Just like the fire. You wash everything down with a sip of homemade beer. Cloudy, lukewarm, and surprisingly strong. Brewing is an art form here, especially when you're using glacier runoff, wild barley, and the occasional "what if we tried moss" experiment. The result is drinkable if you lower your expectations and your standards. Sometimes there's mead, but honey's rare and expensive. More often, it's mead's humbler cousin, bog ale. Less sparkle, more mystery. But it takes the edge off the shark, and that's good enough. You lean back on your elbows, stomach full in that uniquely Viking way. Equal parts hunger satisfied, and digestive gamble accepted. The room is warm now, noisy with digestion and low laughter. The cat has stolen a piece of fish and is proudly dragging it across the floor like it hunted it itself. Outside, the snow hasn't let up. The wind rattles the shutters again, reminding you that this world of odd meals and shared stories is a small, bright bubble in a sea of white. Someone proposes a toast to the cook, to the shark, to surviving another day. Wooden mugs clink, someone coughs, someone else burps loud enough to shake the rafters. And you smile because honestly, for all the fermented oddities, dried fish puzzles, and sour dairy experiments, there's a strange joy in it all. A comfort in knowing that even the weirdest meals can feel like home, especially when they're shared by firelight with people who smell just as funky as you do. By now, your stomach has settled into an uneasy truce with the fermented shark, and the fire has burned down to a soft amber glow. You pull on a second pair of wool socks, inside out, because that's how you really trap the heat, and reach for your outer cloak. It's time to brave the outside world. Yes, really. Because even in medieval Icelandic winter, not every moment is spent huddled by the hearth. Sometimes you need fresh air, or to check on the livestock, or to sled down a hill at unsafe speeds in a handmade wooden tray while screaming in joy and fear. You open the door with a grunt, pushing against the snow piled halfway up the frame. The light outside is faint, blue-gray, and utterly still. A puff of wind scuttles past, flinging tiny shards of ice across the yard like nature's version of glitter. Sparkly, cold, and impossible to clean up. Your boots crunch into the snow as you head out, careful not to trip over the sled someone left upside down near the goat pen. Sledding is a popular way to pass time, especially for the kids, but let's not pretend the adults aren't joining in. That long slope behind the barn? Prime racing territory. And you don't just sit on the sled. No, you lie flat, arms clutched tight, and launch yourself down with the help of a cousin whose job is to push and then duck. The hill is steep. The bottom is icy. There is zero steering. You arrive at the bottom breathless and covered in snow, laughing with frozen lips and snow up your sleeves. Historians still argue whether these recreational activities were organized or spontaneous, but one thing's for sure. Icelanders knew how to make fun out of frostbite. Skiing, sledding, even primitive skating on frozen rivers using bone skates strapped to their boots. All part of the wintry experience. A quirky favorite? Snowshoe races. The shoes are clunky, wooden frames laced with sinew, but they keep you on top of the snow like magic. Kind of, you still fall. A lot. But it's dignified falling, which is what counts. Your older brother dares you to a race to the sheep pen and back, which is a bold move considering the sheep pen is slightly haunted, or so the kids insist. They say one of the sheep has glowing eyes and speaks fluent Latin. You're skeptical, but you agree to the race anyway. It's chaos. You both trip, flail, and nearly crash into a fence post. But in the end, you win by a nose. Mostly because your brother face plants into a snowbank and has to dig out with his mittened hands. You dust off your cloak and take a minute to just breathe. The cold is sharp but invigorating. The snow crunches differently with each step, like layers of frozen music underfoot. You can see your breath curl into the sky where it vanishes into the pale blue dusk. Far in the distance, a few sheep bleat mournfully. They're bundled in their own insulated shelters, munching hay and probably judging you. You swing by the barn to check on them anyway. Inside, it's warmer than expected, thanks to the bodies of sheep, goats, and the occasional nesting chicken. The air smells like hay, damp wool, and yesterday's compost. You scratch one sheep behind the ears. She sneezes on you. Love, Icelandic style. While you're out here, someone suggests gathering more firewood from the half-buried stack near the outer wall. So you form a little firewood brigade. 3 people passing chunks of frozen driftwood from one mittened hand to the next, grumbling about numb fingers and the universal unfairness of how fast wood disappears in winter. Still, you do it. Because warmth is survival, and because there's something satisfying about stacking a neat pile by the door and knowing you helped. Finally, when your cheeks sting and your nose is past the point of sniffing, you head back inside. The door creaks closed. The warmth rushes in to greet you. Someone hands you a towel. Another tosses you a dry pair of socks. The fire flares as someone feeds it a fresh log. You flop down onto the bench, limbs buzzing from the cold and the chaos. Your cloak steams gently in the firelight. There's laughter again. Someone is retelling the sled incident, adding more drama with every retelling. I swear he flew 5 feet in the air, like a snow owl. Your brother groans from the corner, snow still in his eyebrows. You sip hot broth now, cheeks flushed, and your muscles relaxing into the comfort of knowing you survived another winter adventure. There may not be sun or fresh fruit or anything that smells nice, but there's life, movement, play. Even in the darkest days, Icelanders didn't just endure winter. They played with it. The sun, or what counts as sunlight in the land, where the sky looks like wet wool for months at a time, has dipped behind the hills. Again. It's probably 3 in the afternoon, or maybe 10 at night. No one's really sure. Time blurs in winter, but there's one surefire way to know it's evening. The ghosts come out. You're back inside, huddled close to the hearth, socks steaming, cheeks warm. And now it's time for another staple of medieval Icelandic life. Supernatural tales. Because when you live on a volcanic island riddled with lava tubes, abandoned turf houses, foggy valleys, and lonely hills that echo when there's no one in sight, of course you believe in ghosts, trolls, and things that knock on your window when the wind is still. Tonight's storyteller is your great uncle. He's got a voice like gravel in a wool sock, and a twinkle in his eye that says half of what he's about to tell you is either true or very well rehearsed. He leans in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper as he starts the tale of the Draugr, an undead farmhand who came back to finish his chores, then started stealing livestock. Very polite. Then very not. You've heard this one before, but you still get goosebumps. The part where the ghost scratches at the walls? Yeah, you'll be remembering that when the wind creaks the door later tonight. Historians still argue whether these stories were rooted in real fears or simply entertaining metaphors. Was the Draugr a reflection of grief? A way to explain sudden deaths? Or just a good excuse to never walk to the barn alone? Regardless, supernatural tales were woven into the fabric of everyday life. You didn't just believe in ghosts, you scheduled around them. Bad dreams, troll interference, sudden illness, a vengeful spirit, lost mittens. Okay, probably just your cousin, but maybe an elf. Speaking of elves, Huldufolk, the hidden people, these weren't your sparkly woodland fairies. Icelandic elves are unpredictable, sometimes helpful, sometimes deeply offended that you built your sheep pen on their invisible lawn. If your fence keeps falling down for no reason, it might not be the wind. It might be payback. You listen as the tales unfold. A haunted outhouse that moans when no one's inside. A cave where a troll mother raised 12 hungry children, who now roam the hills disguised as shadows. A story about a seal that turned into a man, fell in love, then turned back into a seal because he couldn't stand how Icelanders cook dinner. Some of these stories come with warnings. Never whistle at night. Don't look between your legs at a full moon. And whatever you do, don't leave your axe in the snow blade up, unless you want to invite a snow demon into your house. You glance at the door, just in case. A quirky detail you love? People used to leave offerings for the spirits. Bits of food, small carvings, even bowls of sour milk placed near cave entrances or under large rocks. Not because they were generous, but because it's better to feed a ghost than deal with a hangry one. You feel the mood in the room shift. The fire pops softly. Everyone leans in closer, wrapped in blankets. The stories aren't just entertainment. They're how you navigate this dark, uncertain world. When storms knock out paths, when animals go missing, when someone sees lights on the distant hills at night, these tales make sense of the senseless. Or at least give it a name. You think back to a time a few winters ago when a neighbor swore they saw a man with glowing eyes standing motionless in the field. No footprints, no explanation, just gone. Your family never confirmed it, but nobody let the children play near that field for months. Even now you glance toward the darkened corners of the room, just to make sure nothing is standing there. Just shadows. Just blankets. Probably. And even if you don't really believe, there's a deep comfort in pretending you do. Because if the world is full of mysterious forces, then maybe the bad things aren't your fault. Maybe the door creaked open because of a ghost. Not because someone forgot to latch it. Maybe the cold spot in your bed is just a passing spirit. Not a hole in the roof. You snuggle deeper into your blanket. The wind howls softly outside like a long, tired breath. Someone tosses another log on the fire. Sparks rise, fading into the dark above. And the tale continues. The stories have wound down into sleepy murmurs now, and the hearth glows with a soft orange hue that makes everyone's faces look gently toasted. You're still half listening, still half watching, but now your thoughts drift elsewhere, to matters of the heart, or at least to matters of winter romance, which in medieval Iceland takes on some peculiar forms. Because yes, even here, even now, deep in the coldest corner of the North Atlantic, people fall in love, or something that passes for it. Courtship in the long, snowy months doesn't look like flowers and serenades. It looks like shared blankets, carved spoons, and riddles whispered when no one else is listening. You glance across the room at two cousins, second cousins, so it's fine, huddled together under the same woolen throw. They're pretending not to touch elbows. Failing. One of them just gave the other a carved bone comb, which, as you know, is the 11th century equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs with a handmade love haiku. Historians still argue about the formalities of Icelandic courtship during this era. There are sagas full of grand gestures and stolen kisses, but there's also plenty of evidence that most flirting happened during the boring stuff. Milking cows, mending sails, helping with chores because you just happened to be walking by. And in winter, well, things heat up mostly because everyone's crammed together. Privacy is rare, but there's a quiet sort of intimacy in shared tasks. Tending the fire together, whispering stories while the others sleep, sneaking a laugh at the same bad riddle. You make do, or you get creative. Like the blanket test, a quirky custom in some regions involved allowing a young couple to share a bed under observation. Not for anything scandalous, but to see if they could talk all night without doing anything inappropriate. Imagine your romantic life being judged on your ability to cuddle and make conversation without losing your self-control. Iceland, where even romance comes with frostbite and rules. Sometimes couples exchange love gifts. Tiny runes carved with blessings, hand-spun belts, or a spoon with your beloved's name etched under the handle. If someone gave you a spoon and you accepted it, that meant something. If you used it in front of others, that meant everything. You remember the story of Gudrun and Holly, two locals who fell for each other during the winter of 4 blizzards in a row. They exchanged handkerchiefs, well, square scraps of wool, and left little poems on each other's milking stools. When spring came, they were married in a field of melting snow and confused sheep. Very romantic. Weddings themselves weren't fancy, but they were heartfelt. Families gathered in thick cloaks, walking through slush to the nearest church, or in some cases just to a family-approved priest standing in front of a big enough rock. Vows were exchanged, meals were shared, and yes, somewhere along the way, someone gave a speech that included the phrase, "May your goats always find their way home." And the gifts? Not toasters. More like preserved butter, carved bowls, and in-laws promising not to fight for at least one winter. Tonight, someone mentions an upcoming union. A girl from the next farm over. A boy who helped dig out their sheep during last week's whiteout. It's early, but the families are hopeful. You smile as you sip your broth. Another winter love story in the making. Of course, not all courtships went well. Some involved feuds, some ended in saga-worthy tragedy, and some... Well, let's just say one too many fermented milk toasts can lead to declarations no one remembers the next day. But that's part of it too. The awkwardness, the mishaps, the fumbling charm of trying to be romantic while your nose is red, and your mittens smell like smoked fish. Still, it works. People find each other even in the dark. They exchange small kindnesses, share the warmth, offer an extra slice of dried lamb from their plate. In a land where every hour of sunlight feels like a gift, so does every moment of connection. And now, as you glance once more at the cousin pair still not touching under the blanket, you wonder what little love stories are growing here, under this roof. Quiet ones, wool-wrapped ones. The kind you won't know the end of until spring, but you hope, deeply, that it ends well. The wind is doing that thing again, whistling low through the turf eaves, tapping at the wooden door like an old friend with cold knuckles. Inside, the hearth burns low, but the glow is enough to reveal the figure of the local priest, hunched on a stool and humming something that sounds half like a hymn and half like a riddle gone wrong. You didn't expect him to show up tonight, but here he is. Frost clinging to his wool hood, cheeks flushed, a leather pouch thumping softly against his hip. And it's not just spiritual matters he's bringing. Because in your medieval Icelandic world, the priest is more than a man of God. He's also a poet, a scribe, and sometimes the judge in a dispute over who really owns that goat with the slightly heart-shaped nose. It's a multi-hyphenate role. Priest, poet, lawman. Very on brand for a land where multitasking isn't just a skill. It's a survival strategy. He greets the household with a nod, shrugs off his outer layer, and pulls from his pouch a thin, bone-bound volume. It's not exactly a book, not yet, but a folded collection of vellum pages smudged with soot and salt. He's copied a few psalms onto it, but you know he's hiding something better in there. Poetry. Historians still argue whether most Icelanders composed verse regularly, or whether it was just the gifted few. But judging by how many sagas are stuffed with spontaneous rhyming insults, wedding toasts, and casual death poems, it seems like everyone had at least one good stanza in them. Tonight, your priest is in a sharing mood. He clears his throat, sips some warm whey, and begins to recite. The room quiets. The poem is about snow, about memory, about a cow who doesn't return from the field and the silence that follows. It's gentle, unexpected, and somehow makes everyone feel both sad and warm at the same time. A quirky fact: Icelandic legal codes allowed poems as evidence in court. If you could rhyme your defense persuasively enough, it might actually help your case. My neighbor stole my sheep becomes, "Oh, judge, attend. This sheep did stray from yonder hill to barn of gray." You get the idea. It helped if your poem was backed up by witnesses, of course. But in a land where oral tradition ruled, a well-placed couplet was practically a legal brief. You remember a story your grandmother tells of two farmers who settled a fence dispute not with axes, but with a riddle contest judged by the priest. The loser had to carry the winner's sheep feed for a month. Justice, Iceland style. And while the priest is a man of God, he's also a keeper of older ways. He still knows the old spells, the forgotten charms. He speaks Latin on Sundays and rune verse on Thursdays. He offers blessings over both births and harvests. And occasionally he helps find lost cows by consulting dreams. Tonight, after his poem, he turns to a more practical matter: land rights. There's a quiet dispute brewing between two neighbors about grazing space. The snow has shifted the landmarks again, and no one can quite agree where one pasture ends and the other begins. The priest listens, nods, asks a few questions, then recites a bit of law from memory, verbatim down to the phrasing. Because here's something truly remarkable. Iceland didn't have jails. Disputes were settled at the Thing, the National Assembly, where laws were recited aloud every year by a man called the Law Speaker. All of them, from memory. The priest learned from that tradition. He keeps the law alive not in books, but in his mind. And now in yours. You listen, amazed as always, at how many words a person can carry inside them when paper is scarce and parchment costs a goat and a half. When the legal matters are settled, he tucks away his pages, accepts a bowl of fish stew, and joins the family by the fire. The children ask him to recite the poem again, the one about the cow. He does. Slowly, softly. Everyone listens, and you realize something. The line between law, story, faith, and art is blurrier here than it is anywhere else. You don't separate them, you live them together. In winter especially, when the fire's low and the wind sings outside, it's the priest-poet-lawman who reminds you that justice can rhyme, and grace can wear wool. The fire burns low now, pulsing like a sleepy heartbeat. Around it, the room shifts into a kind of collective yawn. Blankets pulled tighter, conversation turning slow and syrupy. You're full from dinner, full from poetry, and just when you think the evening is finally winding to a soft snore, someone claps their hands and says the magic word, jól. Ah yes, the Icelandic winter holidays. The most sacred excuse to eat too much, tell ghost stories, and wear your nicest tunic, the one with the stain mostly rubbed out. Jól or Yule doesn't just mean one night, it's a whole season. Roughly starting around the winter solstice and stretching through New Yearish territory. It's older than Christianity and just as layered. Pagan and Christian threads are stitched together like one of your aunt's oddly shaped patchwork cloaks. You're not entirely sure which parts are traditional and which parts she made up, but it keeps you warm and that's what matters. And how do you celebrate Jól? With food, fire, and so many stories. Tonight someone's brought out a special treat. A pot of skyr that's been hiding in the cold cellar since summer, set aside just for this week. Thick, tangy, and layered with a mysterious berry jam that's more seeds than flavor, but festive all the same. You eat it with a carved wooden spoon and try not to think about the fact that it may be older than one of your socks. There's also beer, slightly flat, slightly sour, and extremely cherished. You sip it slowly, savoring the warmth in your chest and the way it makes the shadows around the room dance just a little more playfully. Historians still argue whether Icelandic winter feasts leaned more toward pagan rites or church blessings during the medieval era. Likely, both were true at once. After all, in Iceland, everything has layers. Snow, turf houses, religion. One tradition that makes the rounds this time of year? The telling of Jólakvöld Draugr, Yule Eve ghosts. These are not your average spooky stories. These are very specific ghosts. The kind who appear only during the darkest nights of the year. They knock. They whisper. They sometimes ask for a bowl of soup before disappearing into the walls. It's festive. Another key player in Icelandic holiday lore, the Yule cat. Not a cute, fluffy pet. No, this cat is massive, menacing, and supposedly eats anyone who doesn't get new clothes before Yule. So if someone gives you socks this year, say thank you. They may have saved your life. You look down at your own socks, grateful for their patchiness. Then you glance over at your cousin, proudly showing off her new knitted mittens, clearly flaunting her survival instincts. Respect. And then come the Jólasveinar, the Yule lads. Not quite Santa, not quite trolls. They're somewhere between pranksters and mild criminals. Each night for 13 nights before Christmas, one arrives to cause mischief. Slamming doors, stealing sausages, licking spoons, harassing sheep. Their names are oddly specific, like spoon licker, sausage swiper, and candle stealer. It's like someone let a committee of children name them. A quirky tradition you enjoy every year? Setting a small snack by the door, just in case a Yule lad stops by. A chunk of bread, maybe a bit of fat. You've never seen one, of course, but that one time the snack was gone the next morning? Completely unexplained. Definitely not the dog. Tonight's celebration is modest. Some singing, a little dancing, some well-worn jokes about how your uncle resembles door slammer more and more each year. Someone proposes a toast to another winter survived, and everyone drinks. Someone else suggests a second toast to no more fermented shark for a week, and everyone cheers even louder. There's no fancy garland, no flickering string of lights. But you don't need them. You have fire. You have family. You have stories about carnivorous cats and misbehaving trolls to pass down for another generation. As the celebration winds down, someone begins to hum a simple winter song. You join in softly. The tune is older than anyone here, passed down like a recipe no one quite measures. The lyrics speak of snow, of hearth, of patience, of waiting for the sun's return. It will come. Eventually, you just have to hold on. You look around the room, faces soft in the firelight, bellies full, eyes blinking slowly like sleepy owls, and you think, this is what holidays were always meant to be. Not extravagant, not loud, just warm and shared. The fire crackles softly, sounding now like it's whispering secrets to the stone. The light has dulled to a honeyed flicker, and even the cat seems to have melted into the floorboards, tail twitching in a dream. Outside, the wind still prowls, but inside the room has slipped into that quiet middle stretch of the evening, where conversation turns philosophical, or at least wonderfully weird. You're sitting cross-legged, a mug of lukewarm whey in your hands, when someone brings up the question, what if the world's just a giant slab of ice floating on a sea of stars? Which is not that strange a thought, considering that's pretty close to what some people genuinely believed. That's the magic of Icelandic winter nights. They have a way of drawing out strange ideas, and nowhere are those ideas stranger or cozier than in the Badstoffa, the bath stew room turned thinking lounge where naked bodies steam and sleepy minds wander. Yes, we're going back to the bathhouse. But this time, not for hygiene, for philosophy. See, once you've steamed for 20 minutes and your skin feels like melted cheese, something curious happens. Your brain relaxes. The world softens. You start asking questions like, do trolls dream? Or what if stars are just holes poked in the sky by the gods? Historians still argue whether bathhouses functioned as early public forums or just glorified nap chambers. But from the tales passed down, it's clear they served both purposes. This was where village politics were whispered, marriages gently arranged, and the local rune poet revealed he'd been writing an epic about the goat named Helga. A quirky and totally real detail? Some bathhouses had a designated quiet bench for people who didn't want to talk. Of course, this meant everyone definitely wanted to know why they weren't talking, so in the end, it caused more discussion. Icelanders. Not built for silence. Tonight, you're wedged in between two cousins and your aunt. Steam rising from your forearms, the air thick with the mingling scents of hot stones, damp moss, and someone's clove foot salve. The talk turns toward dreams. You share the one from last night where the Yule cat was wearing your tunic and quoting poetry at the moon. Someone nods solemnly. Another adds that dreams are often seen as omens, windows into the future, or at least into your deepest anxieties about how much dried fish you have left. Then the priest, who has somehow materialized again, probably from a corner you forgot existed, murmurs something about the sagas, about how heroes often received wisdom in steam and fog, about how Odin, disguised as an old man, he does that a lot, once appeared in a dream to offer advice about brewing beer. Sacred knowledge indeed. And now you're wondering how much of the world is shaped by what people see in the steam. How many marriages happened because of one oddly vivid sauna dream? How many feuds were avoided because someone dreamt of a raven crying 3 times in the same direction? You're starting to feel a little sleepy. The heat soothes your limbs. The low voices wrap around your brain like a wool scarf, and your thoughts become slippery, like fish in a cold stream. You let your head lean back against the wooden wall, eyes half closed, and listen as someone hums a lullaby their grandmother used to sing. The notes are simple, repetitive, like waves gently thumping the shore of your thoughts. You don't know all the words, but you don't need to. Outside, the wind keeps playing with the door, but no one gets up. The bathhouse is your fortress of fog and warmth, where the rules of the outside world, cold, darkness, hunger, can't quite reach you. Here you're safe. Here you're wrapped in sweat and steam and the soft voices of people you trust. Later, when the water cools and everyone starts bundling up again, someone will probably say something profound like, "The real warmth is the people around you." And everyone will groan, but also agree. Because deep down, you know it's true. You step outside again, hair damp, breath curling in the moonlight. The cold bites at your cheeks, but it's a friendly bite. Sharp enough to wake you up, soft enough to remind you that you're alive. And somehow you feel lighter, clearer, a little wiser. Not bad for a naked sit in a smoky hut. The sky is ink black again, but that's hardly news. It's been dark so long your eyes have adapted to it, the way fish might adapt to living in a cave. You step inside the turf house one final time before bed, cheeks burning from the cold and your cloak dusted with snow that refuses to melt. You stamp your boots and hang them near the fire. Close, but not too close. Last winter someone scorched their souls clean off, and now everyone's a bit more cautious. You're tired but not yet ready to sleep. Not quite. So you turn your attention to the final daily ritual, staying warm enough not to freeze to death in your sleep. This in medieval Iceland is both an art and a science. You head to the communal sleeping platform, really just one large wooden bed frame layered with hay, fur, and an ever-growing patchwork of hand-woven wool blankets. Tonight there are 8 of you piling in. There's a system. Elders in the middle, children along the edges. Anyone with a cold gets a corner with a separate blanket so the whole house doesn't wake up wheezing. You take your spot, pull the sheepskin over your chin, and already feel the heat pooling between your toes. The goat that occasionally shares the bed isn't here tonight, thankfully, since it snores louder than any human and smells like old socks and barn dreams. Historians still argue whether the medieval Icelandic sleeping arrangement was purely functional or culturally symbolic, whether it fostered deeper bonds or simply kept people alive. Either way, it worked, and in a place where heat meant body heat or nothing, no one questioned the logic. A quirky practice you're fond of? Layered socks. You're wearing 3 pairs right now. Coarse wool, soft spun interweave, and one outer pair that your aunt insists were blessed to ward off toe freezing. You believe her, mostly because they're bright red and red feels warm. You hear someone rattling in the corner? It's your cousin, stuffing extra straw between the wall and the sleeping platform. Another winter insulation trick. Keep out the draft by padding every seam with hay, wool, or, in extreme cases, fermented moss. Which sounds awful, but you've tried it. It works. Before sleeping, someone mutters a blessing. It's half prayer, half rhyme, mostly about keeping the house upright through the night and making sure the cow doesn't calve early. Everyone nods solemnly. Or maybe they're already asleep. You settle in, eyes closed, body slowly melting into the warmth around you. But even now, the winter vigilance never quite switches off. You can hear the faint crick of snow shifting on the roof, the deep creak of the wooden walls expanding and contracting like an old man sighing. In the early hours, someone will stoke the fire. Always, because if you let it die completely, the house gets colder than a troll's armpit in minutes. It's usually a rotating duty performed with groggy reluctance and whispered curses. But it means the room never freezes solid, just crunchy. You think back to the stories of entire households sharing not just warmth but dreams. Some believed your soul wandered while you slept, drifting over the snow-covered hills and valleys, watching for signs, visiting ancestors, eavesdropping on future events. That's why you sleep close together. So you return together too. Your own dreams lately have been strange. Glowing wolves, a mountain that whispered your name, an old woman stirring soup with a sword. You're not sure what they mean, but you file them away for tomorrow's bathhouse philosophy session. And then there's the matter of winter breath. You wake up sometimes and see the cloud of everyone's breath rising above the sleeping platform. 8 little ghosts dancing in the lamplight. It's eerie. It's beautiful. It's a reminder that even in the deepest cold, you're still alive. Still breathing. One more survival trick. Don't sleep with your back to the wall. It's the coldest spot, and sometimes the frost seeps through the turf like it's trying to join the cuddle pile. Better to snuggle toward the center if you're lucky, next to someone with a warm belly and forgiving elbows. And now, as your limbs grow heavier and the conversation fades to whispers, you think about the rhythm of it all. How many winters have passed like this? How many nights with the same smells, the same fire, the same shivering dog curled by the door? It's not glamorous, it's not luxurious, but it's yours, and it's warm. Tomorrow there will be more snow, more chores, maybe another sled race, maybe a troll sighting. Maybe, if the gods are feeling generous, a letter from the neighboring valley carried by a shaggy messenger on snowshoes and optimism. But for now, sleep. Rest. Drift. The storm outside can wait. Morning comes slowly in medieval Iceland, if it can even be called morning at all. There's no bold sunrise, no golden beams pouring through a window, just a gradual softening of darkness. Like the world exhaling after holding its breath all night. You blink awake beneath your shared pile of sheepskins and hay, body warm, nose cold, one foot mysteriously bare. The other has 3 socks. You don't question it. Someone's already moving near the hearth, coaxing the embers back into flame with a practiced hand and a few muttered phrases that might be spells, might be curses. The air smells of smoke, sour milk, and the faint hint of someone cooking something fishy and suspicious. Again, you sit up slowly, stretching your arms, listening to the familiar sounds of winter coming undone. Boots stomping by the door, clatter of wooden ladles, the quiet thunk of someone falling off the sleeping platform. A good start to the day, but today feels different. Not because the chores have changed or because the goat's behaving. No, it's the snow, it's melting. You step outside, and for the first time in months, the world has a different sound. The quiet isn't so thick. There's dripping, real, actual dripping, soft and persistent as the tap of fingers on wood. The snow is softer, slumping at the edges like a tired cake. A few patches of brown grass peek through, shy and muddy. Spring is coming. Historians still argue exactly how medieval Icelanders marked the changing seasons without consistent calendars. But you know the signs. The sheep stomp differently. The wind loses its bite. And most importantly, the house smells less like damp wool and more like earth. A quirky ritual this time of year? The mud watch. Children race to find the first true puddle, declare its depth, and poke it with sticks. It's not official, but if your boots get stuck and you lose a sock, it counts as spring. Inside, the energy is changing. Blankets are being shaken out. Old bread scraps are being cleared from shelves. Someone is talking about airing out the house, which mostly involves cracking a door for 10 seconds before everyone screams and slams it shut again. Baby steps. The animals feel it too. The sheep are bleating with something almost like enthusiasm. The chickens are laying more consistently. And there's that particular goat, the loud one, who seems to think melting snow means it can now escape through a fence that's been buried since November. Someone pulls out the dried seeds. Not to plant yet, but to rattle them in little wooden bowls, like holding a promise in your hands. You do the same, fingers running through the grainy weight of future porridge. You head out to help your father check the stream. It's no longer a frozen sculpture of silence. It moves. Water trickles beneath thin layers of ice, babbling like it's just remembered how. You squat nearby, scooping some into your palms. It's so cold it bites your teeth when you sip, but it tastes like hope. The sheep pen gets a cleaning, the outhouse gets approached cautiously, and the snow path to the food store is finally dug through without shovels, just pushed aside by sun and time. Inside the house, the walls feel less like they're leaning in. The light stretches a little farther into the corners. Shadows retreat. Even the cat looks more lively, pouncing on dust motes like it has something to prove. Your family gathers for a midday meal, not to mark a festival, but just to share the moment. Someone carves a sun symbol into the bread crust before baking it. Superstition? Maybe. Or maybe it just tastes better with a little sun scratched on top. The priest stops by again, this time not with poetry or judgment, but with news. A family from the next valley has seen green shoots by the hot springs. Grass. Real grass. No one says much, but everyone smiles a little deeper. Afterward, you sit on the stone wall beside the barn, cloak open to the barely warm breeze, watching steam rise from the fields as the snow shrinks into memory. You breathe in, deep and slow. You made it. It wasn't easy. It never is. The long nights, the cold, the fermented foods, the itchy wool in very personal places. But you survived. You told stories. You laughed. You carved strange things into bones. You listened to the ghosts and the goats and your great-aunt's bathhouse conspiracy theories. And now the land is waking up again. Not in a rush, but slowly. Sleepily. Like you. You sit a little longer, soaking in the pale sky, the distant bleating, the soft drip-drip of the snow surrendering. There's still chill in the air, and your socks are definitely wet. But there's a warmth behind it now. Spring isn't here yet, but it's coming. And now, as the sky softens and your thoughts drift like snow melting down the mountainside, you can rest. You've wandered through a season where time slows to a hush, where the fire becomes a friend and the stories are thick as the smoke in the rafters. You've felt the weight of a blanket shared between cousins, the sting of cold wind on your face, the scratch of a rune under your fingertips. In this world of long, dark winters, it wasn't survival alone that kept people going. It was rhythm, routine. That bowl of hot skyer, that lopsided game board, that shared laugh during the 30th telling of the haunted sheep tale. It was the rituals of everyday warmth, found in steam, in mittens, and murmured poetry near the fire. Now your own hearth grows dim. The last sparks of this tale flicker low, and the wind outside has quieted to a hum, steady and slow like breath in a sleeping chest. You're safe here. The cold can't reach you. The ghosts are polite, and the goat has for once decided not to chew on your sleeve. So let your thoughts drift like steam on a quiet bathhouse night. Let the weight of wool and quiet settle over you. There's nothing more to do now except rest. The snow will fall and it will melt. The stories will begin and they will end. And through it all, you will remain. Warm, wrapped, and gently drifting into sleep. Close your eyes now. The season is slow and so are you. And that's exactly how it should be. End of script. Sweet dreams.